Good afternoon and welcome to Cinema Smackdown on CJLO 1690 AM. I'm your host Michael Brody and I'm joined today by Shane Simmons. And we are here once again
to plug stuff.
First of all, to do part 3 of Much Maligned Sequels, the final chapter, because we will run out of titles after this episode, I hope. But before I get to that, I want to remind everybody, it's funding drive time, and every donation counts. Whether you give $2 or $200, I recommend $200, every contribution makes a difference. For the first time, CJLO is now able to receive monthly donations. You can sign up and contribute as little as $3 a month. And we'll be sending Funding Drive merchandise to every person who contributes. For more information on how you can donate and the perks you can receive, there's keychains, there's earplugs, there's t-shirts. Visit cjlofundingdrive.com. All right, so good afternoon, Shane. I hope you're doing well today.
Oh yeah, after my wonderful misadventure last night.
Tell me a little bit about whatever it was you did last night. As usually, you don't leave the house.
Yeah, I try not to. And then I thought, well, there's an event happening tonight that's bound to be gravely disappointing. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I better go and get my dose of grave disappointment. And it was so much more disappointing than I could have possibly hoped for.
Well, that sounds like it.
I went to...
It's always good for anecdotes.
Well, yeah, one hopes. Mm-hmm. So I went to the Batman Day lighting of the bat signal in Montreal.
Why would they do that?
Why would they do that indeed? Well, we are one of 13 cities worldwide that was participating in this thing. The only Canadian city. And surprisingly, there were only 2 American cities doing it, so it was quite international otherwise.
Well, that's because in North America, Batman is virtually unknown.
Well, certainly people were lighting up the bat signal in countries that you would not normally think would be big Batman fans. But sure, let's go to Barcelona and see the bat signal.
Okay.
So the idea was this was the 80th anniversary of Batman's first appearance in the comics. Celebrating 80 years of Bob Kane stealing credit from Bill Finger.
Good on you. That's very, very true.
In one of the greatest IP robberies of all time. So
it's up there with DC stealing Superman from the 2 guys who made it.
Yeah. It's a heist on a scale that I don't think even Batman himself could cope with.
He certainly couldn't solve it in his 80 years.
So I went down to the Barrie-UQAM metro stop where they were going to light up the signal on one of the buildings across from the park. And I got out of the metro and was surprised to see that the entire park was already roped off with police tape.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's odd, since the park is the obvious vantage point to be watching this event from. Why would they do that and force everyone to watch from the streets and kind of block traffic? But okay, it's Montreal. Logistics, who knows what's going through the minds of the powers that be here. On schedule, it did go on. Now I should say, leading up to this, I could hear there was activity. There was someone on some sort of loudspeaker going on at length about something, but it was too distant to hear. And I recall one of the kids in the crowd, and there were a lot of people there. The police estimated about 3,000 people. Many of them parents with their kids who say, hey, let's come down, bring little Johnny down in his Batman costume and have him look at the bat signal. Hopefully there will be more than just them shining a light on a building. Apparently nothing of the sort was planned. They didn't even bother to run, say, some Danny Elfman music or anything that would be appropriate, that would sort of fit the mood and create a party atmosphere. There was certainly no one selling drinks, or there were no food trucks or anything that would have made sense to help pump the economy. And considering some people in the crowd had literally driven for hours to see this event. There were people there from Ottawa.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. So the ranting, one of the kids commented, it's like, ooh, maybe it's a villain. And he didn't know how right he was. Because the signal went on sharply about 8. It lasted for exactly 17 minutes. It was supposed to be a 4-hour event. But after 17 minutes, the police shut it down, and it stayed down for the rest of the night until everyone got disappointed enough to leave. And the problem was, a madman, dressed in a prison uniform costume, So yes, a costumed villain scaled one of the buildings near the park and decided to read his anti-Montreal manifesto over a loudspeaker, ranting and raving for on and off for quite a long time. Meanwhile, emergency vehicles had cordoned off the area. Police reluctantly agreed to the technicians, okay, fine, you can turn the stupid signal on for like a few minutes, and then we're going to shut it off because we got this thing and we don't want this guy to jump in front of all the kiddies.
Right.
So, but there was no real announcement about what was going on, so people just sort of lingered there going, is the light coming back on? Because, you know, if you showed up a little late, you missed it. In fact, there was one guy who showed up late. One guy was showing him the picture he had taken of the bat signal on the building, the side of the building, and the guy asked him, "Can I take a picture of your phone with the picture of the bat signal?" Because that was the best picture he was going to get out of it the whole night.
Wow. You know, he could have just given you an email.
He could have. I got a picture. So, and I will be covering this for Bleeding Cool officially. I did hear back this morning. I pitched it last night saying, hey, some crazy crap happened. It's kind of funny in an ironic sort of way, you know, with the headline that I'm pitching, Batman Day canceled by costumed madman.
Bleeding Cool, of course, is a rumor and news comic book and film website and video games.
Yeah, they've kind of expanded to be a little bit of every bit of geek culture.
I am a fan of the website. However, once in a while, they come up with a joke about someone or something, and then they will run that joke into the ground over the course of years. They will come back to comments they have made in the past and just keep writing entire articles about a joke headline. The popular repeat joke headline is, fans demand Snyder Cut be released. It is 2 years later, it's still once a week.
Well, I don't know that's an in-joke so much as a stubborn demand.
You'd have to read the articles to understand. Mm-hmm. They are insane, worthless pieces of writing. It's just ridiculous.
Hey, I will readily admit, I've heard Bleeding Cool referred to on more than one occasion as garbage tier.
It's getting there.
But I have known Rich Johnson, the guy who runs it, for quite a long time. I met him in San Diego back in 1997 when he sort of latched on to me because he liked one of my comics, and we sat through the Eisner Awards together. So, you know, we've been in touch since then, and this was just one of those moments saying, you know what, I bet Bleeding Cool would be interested in running an article about this fiasco. Mm-hmm. And a fiasco it was. So, even though the media did cover this, hey, this thing's going to happen, there was all sorts of puff pieces about it, I've not heard one word about how atrociously it all went down. Mm-hmm.
I think there's, considering it went down atrociously.
Oh yeah, there seems to be a concerted effort to kind of sweep this under the rug and say, yeah, it never happened, and everyone who traveled to see this and you missed it, sorry you're disappointed, but nothing to see here. Move on.
They weren't 15 minutes late.
If you're 15 minutes, yeah.
At any rate, well, that's enough about local news. Let's get back to our topic, the much maligned sequels topic, and just like last week, I have my own maligning to do as we begin the show. A little off topic, but a little on topic as it is about sequels. But our real topic is much maligned sequels, which means movies that when they came out were not well received, either by the public or by critics, that we pretty much agree are much better films than they're given credit for. Thus the maligned. However, I'm going to begin my talk with a film that was released this week, which is a sequel, which I'm about to malign the hell out of. I saw Rambo Last Blood.
Oh, you did? Oh,
and now
okay.
Here is the way in which I'm not going to spoil this movie.
I'm genuinely interested in seeing this.
I am just simply going to compare it to another film and tell you that it does the same dirty trick the other movie does.
Okay.
Which is, Rambo Last Blood is basically the same movie as Die Hard 5, whatever that movie, what is that movie called? Die Another Day? Die. The one where he goes to Russia.
Would you just damn die?
Yeah. So, there's a Die Hard movie with Bruce Willis that came out where he travels to Russia to find his son. And about 10 minutes into the movie, while watching it, you go, so why is this a Die Hard movie? This is clearly not John McClane. There's nothing about what he's doing that will remind you of John McClane. And as the movie goes on, you just keep saying that. But it's just a guy looking for his son movie it feels nothing like the history of this character. They make little to no mention of his past history. You're just basically watching Bruce Willis drive a car real fast for a lot of scenes, and then shooting at people. It's a terrible, terrible movie, but made so much worse by slapping the Die Hard title over it. So I watched Last Blood.
So it is not him about digging up the remains of Richard Crenna.
It is not.
Oh.
It is a movie about some dude who works on a ranch, who does not have long hair or wear a bandana, who's kind of a sad, loner, troubleshooter person, who is arguably an adventure hero. Do you remember all those moments in the Rambo movies where he's an adventure hero? Because I don't. I remember him being forced to do stuff or cornered where he had to react. I remember in the previous movie just called Rambo, he was basically a sad man living in the jungle giving tours to people if they needed it.
And then some bad people needed to be shot in the face with a .50 caliber machine gun.
This is not that movie. He is playing a completely different person who, at points in the film, pauses and goes, "I've been pretty messed up by the war." And that's about it.
Really? You were in Afghanistan? Well, in Rocky III.
There are basically zero references to his character, zero references to how previous events might have affected him going forward. Anything whatsoever to do with his continuity is just not there. This could very well have not been a Rambo movie. You don't get any sense of continuation, closure, or anything else. The only positive I have to add to Last Blood is that there are a couple of scenes in the movie that are accidentally funny. That's it. That's it. That's all we got. All right, we are going to take a quick commercial break while I try to wash the last blood off my hands.
Are you looking to
that wasn't my worst transition.
Well, learn about
I'm still not getting any sound in the headphones.
Oh, we'll try to compare because it's way up.
Oh, yeah.
As well as work abroad,
In fact, mine's a little
language
loud.
travel, and internships at the Study and Go Abroad Fair on Thursday, October 3rd
No, this one's
at
dead
the
too.
Palais de Congrès de Montreal.
Are they just not plugged
Admission
in?
is free. For more
Oh, they're not
information,
plugged in.
check
Oh,
out
well,
our
that would be it then.
www.studyandgoabroad.com.
I don't know where they go, Where's this one? This one's plugged in.
This is,
Oh, hang on. That one. It's plugged in.
Is it?
Yep.
Every
Try it again.
Thursday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Dead.
Listen to Fatal Attraction. CJ
it's super
Lowe's
loud
very
now.
own cesspool of weird
Nothing.
YouTube
Nothing.
videos and
Nothing.
bad advice.
I mean, it's
and
plugged right the
sometimes I
fucking
interview really cool people. So that's
Alright, well, we have 10
Fatal
seconds to
Attraction
try
Oh, well.
to figure out the thing that we're not about to figure out.
Whatever.
You should really listen to it.
And we're back on CGLO 1690. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown. I am Michael Brody. I'm joined by Shane Simmons. We are talking about much maligned sequels. We spent the entire first segment kind of not talking about much maligned sequels.
No, but we have means to tie in directly to what we're going to talk about next.
Right. So you had talked a little bit about last night's disastrous bat signal lighting in Montreal. And what do you got coming out of that one?
Well, out of that one, I will say on the maligned Batman sequel front, I cannot tell you how much I love Batman and Robin. Oh wait, not that one. No. I am extremely fond of what was a surprisingly dismissed entry in a series, which is Batman Returns. Now it's one of those.
I'm sorry, but that is one of the most beloved films ever made. How could
Among
that possibly...
Among Joe Average, though,
Barely.
that film came out,
Yeah.
and it was unsettlingly dark, morbid, gothic, creepy
you're right that
freak
it's more of
show.
a cult following, but boy, is it known.
Oh yeah,
as
yeah,
one of
it
those.
is. But the reaction to it was negative enough that they said, "Hey, well, since Tim Burton doesn't want to do more of these, let's go Joel Schumacher and have the whole film look like a neon gay nightclub." And it's going to be silly and funny, and we'll get Jim Carrey, and it'll be a laugh a minute, as opposed to this grim, bleak, dark comedy that was Batman Returns.
I mean, look, I think Batman Returns is probably one of the top 25 films I've ever seen.
Again,
I think it's
that's
kind
us.
of magical. And one of the things I know it suffered from was the critics and the audience said, how come there's not much Batman in this? It's like, there's only so much of a dude in a Batman suit running around that you could really stand before it just becomes dull. And this has the right amount. It is, every time he shows up, it's exciting, it's interesting. I don't need to see Batman.
It has the perfect Batman introduction scene, which I think shows what Bruce Wayne is really all about. He's a guy who sits in his big, empty, darkened mansion, brooding, and then the bat signal comes on, and he comes to life.
Yep.
Except if it's Montreal.
Well, it certainly activated one man. As you mentioned.
One ranting lunatic.
One ranting lunatic. Oh, how awesome. Was it? You said it was an anti-Montreal rant?
Yeah, apparently. I didn't hear it, but the technician who was running the bat signal was candid about what was going on to some of the crowd, because he knew someone in the crowd, so he was saying, guy asked him, what happened? Why is it off? Why is it? And I was like, police made us turn it off, and this guy had an entire anti-Montreal manifesto.
Yeehaw.
Which is probably one of the reasons why City Hall, and I do have a message into City Hall saying, do you have a comment about what happened last night? Because I'm writing an article about this, and perhaps you'd like to put a more positive spin on it than I'm going to, because it makes you look really bad on an international level, because of the participating 13 cities globally. We're the ones who screwed it up.
I don't know.
Although, actually, apparently the Los Angeles one did not go very well either, because they realized only after the fact, oh, wait a minute, we didn't buy a permission to shine the spotlight on the building we're going to shine it on. So that was an issue as well, apparently.
I don't know. Giant promotional stunts. Like
I know, a giant promotional thing from DC. I mean, how could DC screw anything up?
Speaking of movies. They do quite well in their TV shows, but their movies are quite awful. So,
They're also on the DC front where they're wondering, they're going to find out late October whether AT&T, their new parent company, is going to sell off their publishing end.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's news to me. In what month did you say?
Yeah, end of October. They're having a board meeting. So AT&T has basically had a controlling share bought by some investor group.
I have a suggestion. Disney should buy it.
Well, you never know.
Because then we know where those characters will end up.
In fact, there's a weird connection about Apple talking about buying out Sony, and there's Apple connections to Disney, so they might get Spider-Man back in this really roundabout way. There's the financial wheelings and dealings that go on.
The Spider-Man drama of the last 2 years, especially the last 2 months, that would be hilarious. Oh, we got it back.
Yeah. But on a DC front, the comic sales are down so badly that after this merger happened, they might just throw away the actual publishing end of DC because it's such a drop in a bucket, no one cares.
The crazy thing about the publishing end of comic books is, at this point, the comic books are a tiny percentage of what the films do. So there was a suggestion made 5 years ago, which never came to be, which I was super interested in. There was talk of turning the comic books into a mere promotional device with no thought to profit, meaning they were going to drop the price of comic books back down to something like $1.50. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it would simply be, here are these books that we're going to publish at a loss so people will actually buy them in quantity, because a $5 comic book makes it very hard to buy 10 of them a week. We're going to publish them in quantity just to keep our IP high, to keep it in the public, people aware of it. And I think that's a brilliant...
Well, I've advocated for a while now that the smartest thing the two majors could do would be to set their superhero books to almost exclusively tie in with their movie properties and what's going on in those franchises.
Oh,
because,
I couldn't disagree more.
Well, the problem is the comic book industry is failing on an epic scale at the moment. The sales are so down, stores are closing at a rate of 10% per year, to the point where the number of retailers out there really can't even support the majors as far as retail outlets. Something substantial has to happen to correct the course. probably starting with the ability to have retailers return books for refunds,
Right.
because currently they don't have that ability.
That's always been an issue for the last 30
Yeah,
years.
and the publishers have, Marvel and DC specifically, have been abusing the retailers badly for decades with all their variant covers and, here, you have to buy 50 copies of this to get the most valuable variant cover by the hot artist.
But that's the whole argument about making comic books collectible, which is something people seem to enjoy that I despise. All I want to do is read a story. I don't want anything to do with... It is like saying, I just went to the photocopy place and I photocopied this document. You want it, don't you? Because you'll never be able to get another one. Well, I could just photocopy another one, right? Well, sure, but it wouldn't be the photocopy I made. It's like, well, these are literally just that. They're copies.
Wait, don't you want to buy comics so you can send them away to a comics grading company and have them put in a comic coffin for all time with a rating number in the corner, so no one can ever read it again? They can just look at the cover.
No, I don't see the point of any of this.
That really? Because that seems to be the only growth industry in comics these days.
I am the happiest person in the world because comic books went digital about 20 years ago, and now nearly every comic ever printed can be read online somewhere. And it just means the material is available. That's all I care about. I like to read books. To
quote last week's episode, pirate.
That's not piracy if it's just up there.
Well, some
stuff is made.
Not all of them are officially in digital format.
A lot of stuff is.
Yeah.
A lot of things are legitimately available at this point.
I mean, certainly I've had my own comics digitally pirated long before they were available for digital download on Amazon. Literally decades before.
I'm pretty much willing to bet you didn't lose a lot of money on that, do you?
Oh, probably not, but all the same, it is theft.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a pleasurable thing. All right, but we were talking about much maligned movies. We've gone way off topic, what with digital downloading of comic books. So let me talk about my favorite much maligned movie, and I begin by one of my favorites. I really don't want to highlight this as the favorite. That's a terrible idea. I want to begin by mentioning, because you brought up a Bat film, I'll bring up a Bat film. My Bat film is the Twilight movies. Now, I will begin this by saying the Twilight movies are bad.
Does anyone ever turn into a bat in any of the Twilight movies? Or do they just sparkle their asses off?
If you take the right amount of hallucinogens,
yeah.
there's plenty of bad action. So, I have said this many a time. I'm going to kind of repeat this little angry speech right here. The Twilight movies are bad. I can't really defend them. The first movie is nigh unwatchable in that I think the director did a horrible job of shooting and editing that film. It doesn't flow. Character moments don't work. The choreography is here and there. The editing itself made it hard to be engaged in any scene. And on top of all of that, like every other Twilight movie, it has the worst dialogue of any mainstream movie of the last 25 years. It's just really, really wooden dialogue. So, it was a great surprise to me that I found the films actually got better as they went along. The first thing they did was jettison the first director and bring in people who were, a little better. There was the second movie, I can't think of his name. It's one of the directors of American Pie. Chris Weitz. I think it was Chris. There's two of them, though, so I don't remember which one it was. I'll say Chris Weitz. And it's a better movie. Just on a technical level, so it made it more watchable. The third film is by David Slade, which, again, better director, more watchable. And then the last two films are by Bill Condon. The guy who did Gods and Monsters, a legitimate filmmaker. And again, I cannot really say that these are good movies because they are not. However, people just started to dismiss them immediately, which I fully understood. But I watched all of these, and here's my maligned sequel, the fifth and final Twilight movie, which can almost be watched by itself, almost. The fifth and final Twilight movie deviates from the other films to a great degree because there are good guy vampires who all hang out in a small town, and then there are the bad guy vampires who are essentially the Vatican of vampires. They're in Europe, and they're like a little coven of guys who make all the rules, and whenever they don't like something, they will swoop in and murder people. That's just the thing they do, much like the current Vatican. So the fifth,
what do you mean current Vatican? It's always been like that.
The fifth Twilight movie involves a child And the evil vampires in Europe decide they want that child. So they amass their forces to come to America to find this kid and take it from our heroes. Our heroes don't want this child taken from them. So they essentially send up their own bat signal and call out for all the vampires around the world who are kind of against the head vampires to come join them and fight the bad guys. And the thing about the Twilight films is if you watch them, you realize every single vampire in these stories has a power. They have a little superpower that each one is a little different. They've all got something. All the good guys do and all the bad guys do. They've all got an ability, whether it be electric powers, which is one of the characters, or just sort of a mind control thing, which a lot of the characters have. At any rate, we start to see these different characters with different powers in this fifth movie, and they amass forces to do a great battle. And I watched this movie, and I was struck about 25 minutes into it as they were assembling their two super teams, that this was an X-Men film. And as the movie went on, it became more and more obvious to me that this was an X-Men movie. It was a bunch of superpowered mutants doing battle. And the movie literally moves to a massive battle on a battlefield where one side and the other face off, have a big confrontation, and then fight. Now, I say this is an X-Men movie. I'm unwavering in this. Here is my other grand statement. It's the best X-Men movie. There are about 10 X-Men movies at this point, and the Twilight film is better than any of them. It is a more successful superhero confrontation film than any of those other movies. It's also got a more satisfying ending. It's got a better fight scene. Everything about it. It's just an entire movie based on the heroes are going to fight the villains.
And the Twilight Wolverine is way more dreamy.
Well, yeah, but that's Kristen Stewart. At any rate, I am a Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 apologizer. But again, on the basis that it is the best X-Men movie. So that's my much maligned sequel. We are... How do I put this? It's time for a quick description of what you're listening to. It's our halfway point in the show, which means time for some station identification. You're listening to CJLO 1690 AM. And...
Is there something going on?
There is a funding drive going on, and so I'm going to mention a little bit about that. CJLO is Concordia and Montreal's campus... Alright, I'm going to start over. CJLO is Concordia and Montreal's campus community radio station. This is why we provide diverse programming for groups who don't have access to mainstream media. We have a number of cultural programs that serve Montreal's cultural communities. We provide coverage for the city's arts groups and many awesome festivals and activities. And we play local and underground artists you won't hear anywhere else. Now we're asking for the community to support us. Give us a call at 514-848-7471 or visit cjlofundingdrive.com and help us continue to support the local scene. Another number you can use to phone us is 514-940-3095. Feel free to call anytime, including right now. We have operators standing by. It's us, but we'll take your call on air. Why not? It could be funny. At any rate. So, you're listening to Cinema Smackdown, where we are running down the much maligned sequels to films where the public and or the critics crapped on something that we think is worth a second look or is an excellent film in and of itself.
Sequels to films that often became instant classics, and therefore the sequels, no matter how good they ultimately were, found it sort of an impossible act to follow.
Very true. Do you have another much maligned sequel for me?
I do, because this one also ties into what we were talking about earlier. You were talking about the very new Rambo film, and there is a Rambo film that I want to discuss as one of the maligned sequels. It was probably the most forgotten, disavowed Rambo film of all. Of course, the original Rambo film was First Blood, about post-traumatic stress syndrome, Vietnam vet running afoul of local authorities in a small, I think it's West Coast town, if I believe, northwest coast. Anyway,
it's Vancouver. So
yeah, effectively, yes. And then he starts to shoot up the town, and it's one of those films that ends with, well, we're just going to put this guy out of his misery, right? Which is how the book ends, but it's not how the film ends, because it's Stallone, and he doesn't like to die in his movies, ever.
They shot both versions.
Yeah, well, you can be sure he used his clout to say, no, the audiences don't like to see me die, so I don't think I should die in this film. And, I guess there's a point because the film made a lot of money, enough to justify a sequel, which was Rambo First Blood. First Blood Part 2. Yeah.
Because that phrase makes sense.
Now, among a lot of quarters, people love this film. It's the sort of balls-to-the-wall action film where Rambo becomes a full-blooded American hero looking for lost and forgotten Vietnam prisoners of war and bringing them back home. And I think that film is utter trash.
Yeah, so do I.
I don't think it's well shot. I don't think it's well directed. I don't think it's well edited. It's almost
screaming.
It's practically a canon film from that era.
Absolutely.
It's that level of trash. But then, several years later, they made the forgotten one, the disavowed one. The last one with Richard Crenna, which was Rambo 3. And this one, the funny thing is, I rewatched the series several years ago, probably leading up to the release of Rambo, the fourth one in the series. And I kept waiting for things that I remembered well from the series to happen. And it turns out all those things I remembered well were in Part 3, including the greatest of Rambo's self-surgery scenes.
Okay.
I'm always fond of Rambo performing self-surgery.
Is this the gunpowder one?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was in the first one, but no, in the first one he sews himself up, which is hard enough to watch, but it's not as extreme as the one I remembered. And I thought, oh, does that really happen in Part 2? No, it didn't happen in Part 2 either. It's Part 3 where he opens a shotgun shell, takes out the gunpowder, stuffs it into a wound in his side that went through both ends, and then sets it on fire to cauterize the wound. And it's one of the nastier bits of self-surgery I've seen in cinema history. I'm a little bit of a fan of scenes along those lines. And I was saying the film is shockingly slick. All the Rambo films are a little bit different to each other in tone and feel. And this is the one that comes closest to being a James Bond movie. And I say that very self-consciously because it is also the film, it's in the late 80s, so it is one of two films that I know of where the hero gets to be buddies with the Mujahideen before they became Al-Qaeda. Because, well, they're fighting the Ruskies, and therefore they're the good guys on our side, right?
Right.
So Rambo hung out with them, and who else hung out with them? Yes, James Bond, right in the same period, in The Living Daylights, the first Timothy Dalton Bond film. Again, well, the Ruskies hate you guys, so let's pal around. And boy, did that not age well.
Right.
But I will still recommend Rambo 3 as also the film that has climaxes with the most ludicrous game of chicken in cinema history. It has to be seen to be believed. It is tank versus attack helicopter, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because, tanks don't fly.
It's a tank, yeah.
Helicopters do. So you would think the helicopter had more options in that game of chicken. Well, it still happens, and it still ends with a collision.
A scene to be proud, an A-team level scene to be proud of?
Yeah, it's just a better, slicker, more fun, and much more humorous Rambo film than you ever possibly imagine, in light of the very next one being the grimmest, goriest, nastiest of the bunch. I'm looking forward to seeing the new one just to see if it compares at all to the level of extreme horror that prevails the fourth Rambo film.
Mm-hmm. Well, there we go.
But no spoilers, because, I want to find out for myself just how wrong-headed and disgusting this one is.
Here's my suggestion to you, Shane, and to anyone else within earshot. Do not pay to see this movie. Rambo Last Blood.
Oh, we all pay.
Do not pay.
We all pay with our time.
It's still Sylvester Stallone is another one of these actors who now makes 3 to 5 straight-to-VOD movies a year. This is one of those. This is do not expect your high-caliber murder scenes. They are not in this. It is not that kind of movie.
No, he doesn't grab the pudding gun and reduce people to small puddles of liquid in this one?
Nope.
Damn!
You will actually say to yourself several times throughout the film, how is this Rambo? How? in what way is this that character?
If it has a scene, does it have a scene like in the fourth one where he doesn't have his usual Bowie knife and there's no convenient Kmart to go buy one, so he just makes one, except what he ends up making looks like an orc sword?
No.
No?
There is a knife in this. That's the closest I think it comes to being Rambo-like. But anyway. I could just go on and on about how not good this movie is, but then I would have to actually describe some of it, which I don't feel like doing. Instead, let's go to my next much maligned sequel. Alright, here's a real weird one that will probably appeal to nobody with an earshot, but let's talk about it anyway. There was a film in the mid-'80s called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is a really rough movie. Even by today's standards, you watch this film, it's uncomfortable. It's like the first Texas Chainsaw style uncomfortable feature. It's about a serial killer wandering around, just haphazardly murdering people with a buddy. And it is not a happy film. It is a little bit on the artistic side, but it's a rough picture. I can't particularly say that I enjoyed it when I saw it. It has the breakthrough performance from Michael Rooker. It's his first real role, if he's ever done anything else. It's the thing that put him on the map, playing this very believable murderer character. But, like I said, it's very well regarded. And in 1996, they made a sequel to it called Henry 2, Mask of Sanity, or simply Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer 2. I prefer Mask of Sanity. And they went out to Michael Rooker to reprise his role, because it is a direct follow-up to the original. It's just more shenanigans with this guy wandering around killing people haphazardly. But Rooker was already kind of famous by then and had better offers than probably no money, is my guess. So he opted out, and they just got somebody else to play him. This movie is way darker, way bleaker, way more unpleasant than the first one, which made it a little more fun. It's a little bit more outrageous. It's directed by this guy named Chuck Perrello, and I have sought out all of his movies now. And he's made about 3 or 4 films. They're all extremely bleak crime films that veer way into exploitation territory. And there is just something about the tone he creates. I've never read really positive things about him from any major critics. Nobody's ever noticed that he has this little oeuvre of interesting films. But you have to understand, as recommendations go, this is a hard film to sit through. It is only nasty, rough characters. Anybody who shows an ounce of humanity is crushed underfoot at some point. And it's just a question of really good filmmaking and somebody who had something to say in the really rough horror genre, I would say. I will also mention that there are 2 cuts of Henry 2. There is the bloodless cut, which exists and is a lot easier to find than the uncut version where every time he kills somebody, it is essentially a Tom Savini murder scene. Now, Tom Savini didn't work on this film. I don't want to make that, but it is those kind of kills. Like ridiculous mannequin blood, fake but great-looking murder scenes, whereas the bloodless cut, of course, just kind of cuts from him beginning to do something to, and he walks away wiping his hands. But yeah, without the death scenes, it's a little odd as films go. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Henry 2, Mask of Sanity. I have never managed to make a single person ever watch this movie. I have also never spoken to another human who's tried to see it. So,
so we'll just have to take your word for it.
Yeah, as malign sequels go, it's definitely up there. Alright, Shane, you got another one for us in about a 3-minute window?
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned Tom Savini, I feel compelled to mention that the original run of zombie films out of George Romero, of them, Day of the Dead was not well received by many people, although it is now regarded as a classic. But at the time, following up Dawn of the Dead, and of course the original Night of the Living Dead, a lot of people turned their nose up on the rather slow pace of Day of the Dead, which led to, as Leonard Maltin put it, despite it being talk, leads to a showstopper of a finale. I would not say it's just talk throughout. It is, to my mind, quite fascinating talk about people stuck in an underground bunker together trying to solve the zombie apocalypse when there's clearly no solution forthcoming, and them trying not to kill each other.
Yeah, it is the film with the, arguably, because I'm pretty sure you'd argue with me based on Dawn of the Dead, but arguably it has the best performances. I love the actors.
Oh yeah, I think the acting is of a higher caliber. Yeah. Although some of it is very, very much in the shrill spectrum of things, especially with Captain Rhodes, who who chews a lot of scenery in his increasingly manic rage at the situation he finds himself in.
Yeah, I like him though. He's a charming character.
The recently deceased, was it Joe? What's his name?
Joe something, Captain Rhodes.
Polito, something. Highly recommended. Also, I am still of the, even though that one, it took years for that one to win a lot of fans over, I'm still waiting for the years to play out before fans are won over by the subsequent Land of the Dead.
That film is garbage. How dare you even pretend it's part of that series?
I think it's actually the last part of the series, even though Romero went on to make two more after that.
After seeing Land of the Dead, which has like arguably whatever the number is, I'll pretend it's $100 million budget, because it just looks like they spent tons of money on it.
Romero film shot in Toronto, I think not.
But it does look like it costs money. Then you go on to these essentially student-made films he made after that.
Right.
As not good as his follow-up films are, they are a massive breath of fresh air after the garbage that is Land of the Dead. And I will simply say this about Land of the Dead. This, to me, is the point at which, how do you argue for this movie when it includes this? It is a movie with a zombie apocalypse. The world has been destroyed. And we establish that there are people of different classes in this world, and the entire movie is about the gap between these two classes of the wealthy and the poor. And why are the wealthy wealthy? Because they have money. In the zombie apocalypse, where anyone can go to a deserted town, crack open a vault, and take $1 billion in cash money out, there were people with
which
cash,
they literally do in Dawn of the Dead.
And it's never explained. They're just like, Dennis Hopper's character is rich.
Hey,
he runs things.
I will point out to you,
understand.
Ken Foree in Dawn of the Dead, they break into the bank and they take money, and there's that moment of, well, this has no value anymore, does it? And they hold on to it anyway because, as Ken Foree says, well, you never know.
Yeah, but you never know doesn't make a lick of sense.
You never know. One day, Dennis Hopper might set up a city-state where money counts for something again.
And again, if you just take a day trip out of town, get yourself $17 million and drive back into town.
Well, it's kind of like mining Bitcoin. You just have to face a zombie apocalypse to get some.
Well,
otherwise, it's just waiting there for you to take.
Speaking of the zombie apocalypse, here's a couple of ads.
Cinema Politica Concordia.
I just literally that for me. It's like,
with your weekly dose of
so you want me to believe that this is a problem between these characters?
Take place every Monday in room H110 of the Hall.
It's the premise of the film. It fails on every level.
See, I would say more to the point. It's like, how can you like a film that has this in it? I say, how can you like a film that has Adja Argento in it after she murdered Anthony Bourdain?
Yeah, but that's one of the things that endears me to her. I love that moment, realizing that she definitely helped with that.
Well, you're the female lead of this, and you're the most awful person on earth.
Me, Sarah, as I hold your hair back, give you a glass of water,
fan for you.
Hangover blues.
He does nothing for me. He added nothing to the cultural landscape for me. Is he special in your heart? You're a big fan of all of his cooking shows?
It was the best thing on CNN when CNN ran completely into the dumpster. So.
And we're back. You're listening to CJLO 1690 AM. I'm Michael Brody. I'm joined by Shane Simmons. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown. And today, we're talking a little bit about the CJLO funding drive. And here's one more tidbit about that. CJLO provides a voice for local and independent music that doesn't have a big promotional budget behind it. Keep Montreal's music community strong and become part of the reason that CJLO exists. Give us a call at 848-7471, or visit cjlofundingdrive.com and support community radio in Montreal. I'm all for that. I've done my time. I have put money into this round. Shane, you put some money in. I know, because I took money from your wallet when you weren't looking.
What?
Threw it in. Well, arguably, it's almost how willingly you parted with that cash.
Well, we're all doing our time here because this was our community service plea bargain.
I don't like to get into the details. All right.
Only 10 more years of this, and then we're clear.
I think it's my turn to mention another much maligned sequel, as that is the topic of our day. Which one shall I choose? I've got one here that I know that you have a certain odd fondness, so I'll bring it up and then we can both sort of debate it. I don't know if it is definitely maligned. I kind of liked this movie, though, and just in its oddness and complete unwillingness to do anything like its original breakout hit, they made a sequel to the Blair Witch Project. And it is called Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows. It came out in the year 2000. And I'm not a Blair Witch Project fan. I saw that film. It seemed really fake to me. The performances were horrid. And again, much like my aggravation with Land of the Dead, I had a similar aggravation with the Blair Witch Project. They had one plot element where I was like, and now I'm abandoning you. I don't care what happens to you. There's a scene in the Blair Witch where they get lost in the woods, and one of the characters throws away their map out of aggravation. Yeah, that was the moment where I was like, and I'm out. Because I would just murder that person.
Well, admittedly, he failed Orienteering 101.
But yeah, that guy, the moment that happened, I was like, you're like, I'm upset. I threw our map away last night when no one was looking. Okay, then I hope you all die now. That was it. I just watched the rest of that movie waiting for them to die. And I just fell out of love very quickly with it beyond that point. But they waited a couple of years and decided to, instead of doing a found footage style sequel, that they would do more of a mainstream movie with characters influenced by having seen the Blair Witch Project, would go to the small town and have like a little weird experience together. And it's such a strange movie, but I found it oddly compelling. I kind of liked the performances and the strange characters, and I kind of like where the story goes. Did you enjoy that film at all?
Not really, no.
You're in the majority then.
It's certainly a film that washed over me, and I have virtually no recollection of today. What I remember from that film is an experience years and years ago, a little while after it came out, when we were in a video store together. Remember video stores?
Nope.
We do. We're old enough to remember.
Nope, I don't know what that means.
And I spotted something on a shelf for sale, and we got into a guessing game. And I said, there's a piece of merchandise on that shelf. What is the last film on Earth you would ever bother to merchandise? And we had basically a 20 questions type of guessing game that went on for a good hour before you finally narrowed it down and said, oh, it's Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows. And sure enough, there were these little Kubrick figurines.
Well, Kubrick is a brand of Lego-like,
yeah.
Figures. Yeah, just
yeah.
to make that clear.
And, so the whole cast of Book of Shadows in that box, at which point you told me, and I conceded, you have to buy this. So yes, I still have my box of Kubrick Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows figurines sitting on a shelf doing nothing but collecting dust and shame.
It is kind of great how there are tie-in toys and books for movies that were completely not accepted by the public.
Yeah, and somewhere there was some executive who said, ooh, guess what rights I just scored merchandising for?
I know. A friend of mine has occasionally, he owns a computer gaming company, and he occasionally says, you won't believe what I'm negotiating for. And then he'll tell me, and I will laugh. Tell him that.
But it'll be the next big thing.
The fascinating thing is there was another Blair Witch movie made in 2016, simply called Blair Witch, by filmmakers who kind of interest me. That would be Adam Wingard as director and Simon Barrett as writer. And they've made some okay films, including, as I've mentioned several times to you, Shane, but you still haven't watched, The Guest, which is a proto-John Carpenter style movie.
And it's funny, I was thinking about that when I was watching a movie the other day, trying to remember the title that you keep recommending to me.
Well, that's one. The Guest.
Yeah, no, that film specifically, it's not a compelling title that really sticks in my head.
The movie that they made that people seem to take note of was called You're Next, which was the
right. That's why that's why it
family-
occurred to me, because I was actually watching You're Next again with a bunch of friends.
the
I had
family murdering each other movie.
It
which
was
is kind of entertaining.
it was my this past week's movie night choice.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's shocking.
Because we're going to be missing a number of weeks in October, which is usually Halloween month.
Oh.
So I said, you know what, I want to get a horror movie out there, and I'm sort of stuck for choices, and I wanted to refresh my memory about that film anyway. So.
Well, I always take any opportunity to mention that before they made Your Next, which had some budget, not much, but some budget, they made a zero-budget movie together called A Horrible Way to Die, which came out in 2010. And I think A Horrible Way to Die is by far their masterpiece film. It's the one I keep hoping they'll come close to making again. A Horrible Way to Die is about a serial killer, and we see him on the road heading somewhere. He has a destination in mind, and every person he meets along the way, he kills. Just casual run-ins, kill. Next casual run-in, kills that person, and so on and so on. At the same time, there's a secondary plot about a woman and her boyfriend, and she's talking to him about they're living their lives, they're having little moments, and she just keeps alluding to something bad in her past. And it turns out her ex-boyfriend is this serial killer, and he is driving cross-country to get her. And the whole movie is a collision course between these two characters, and the resolution of the film is fascinating. It's a very different movie than I expected. It is a slow burn film. It's a zero
Tell me
budget.
they get back together again, because I was really rooting for
It's
those
not a-
crazy kids.
It's not a Mickey and Mallory film, but it's not the Natural Born Killers film.
Because if that's how it ends, I'll hold that for Valentine's movie night.
I highly recommend you see this film, as I do to everybody. It's a great, great DIY filmmaking movie. And at any rate, A Horrible Way to Die by Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett is by far my favorite of all their works. Look forward to Adam Wingard's Godzilla vs. Kong movie, because that's what's coming next from that guy. Different writers, but still. He also made the Death Note movie that was on Netflix a couple years ago.
Right.
Which is well-directed and in parts really interesting and in parts failed me. But that's a plot level. There's a couple plot things I didn't like in the Death Note remake / Americanized version. So yeah, that was the Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows quasi-review / kind of recommendation, only because it's such an odd film. And hey, you can probably still buy those Kubrick figures of the characters in the film if you dig deep enough.
I am perfectly willing to sell them to you for a massive profit.
I'm thinking about. I'll consider it. You after the show, you give me a price, and I'll give you an offer, and we'll see where we end up. Do you have another much maligned sequel to recommend, Shane?
Yeah, I am Mr. Mainstream today. I've kind of blown through so many choices over the last couple weeks.
No one's ever heard of.
Exactly. So we're playing against each other that way. So at least listeners can go, oh yeah, well at least I've seen that film and know that film. So I'm going to bring up a little film that no one's ever heard of called Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Is that some kind of the Mummy offshoot?
It was a little art house film that followed. They tried to get Brendan Fraser for it, but they just couldn't land him, so they had to settle for some guy named Harrison Ford.
I heard they tried to settle for Tom Selleck, but something went wrong.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Trivia fans will know that Tom Selleck was tied into his Magnum PI contract and therefore could not do Raiders of the Lost Ark, presumably without his mustache.
But he should Pierce Brosnan it. It's been an extra couple of decades.
Honestly, I think Tom Selleck has aged better than Harrison Ford.
Currently, yeah.
Yeah.
But not his politics.
Yes, his
politics are a little rough.
He's certainly in the Hollywood vein of guilty of acting while Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he is a little bit of a monster. Go read some books. At any rate, tell me about this little-known, little-seen film, The Temple of Doom.
So it was a film that was dismissed at the time as crass and gross and kind of racist, with a female lead who was a dumb blonde for most of the movie.
All of which is very true.
Juvenile, silly, and to which I say, yes.
Yep. Yep.
And it's also absolutely fantastic. That movie is magic.
It is my favorite of the 3, arguably 4 adventures.
Arguably, indeed.
Yeah, it is by far my favorite. I would not argue it's a better movie than Raiders of the Lost
Exactly,
Ark,
that's my
but
same
I
position.
prefer it.
It's not as good a film as Raiders, but for me it is an eminently more rewatchable film.
It is a very odd movie. It has sensibilities that don't even belong in 1984. Like it's almost a throwback film in its own way. It's practically what you would call a movie musical. It has big set-piece numbers, and it in fact does have a musical sequence.
In some ways, it's a better throwback to the era it's trying to capture than Raiders was.
Absolutely. Although I would say that with just a couple more songs, it's practically a Bollywood film.
Yeah, well, that if made today, it well could have been. And that would have been a lot of fun. I would advocate for a remake along those lines. Mm-hmm. In fact, if they finally get around to making that 5th proposed Indiana Jones film, if they just want to go back to Bangkok Palace in Temple of Doom and just go all right, full-on Bollywood, that way Harrison Ford can just sit on the sidelines and watch the musical unfold without breaking a hip.
Well, that's the end of our Much Maligned Sequels series. We've done 3 of them now.
We've beaten this, like many sequels, we've beaten it to death.
If you have a chance, please fund CJLO. Send us some money. Go to the website, which is cjlofund.com or something like that. I'm not looking at it right now. I should probably glance back at it. It's cjlofundingdrive1word.com.
We need oil to lubricate our squeaky microphone stands.
Speaking of Much Maligned Sequels, Shane, how's your new book doing on
considering
Amazon?
there is a paperback of it sitting right on the desk right here, right now, for you, as a thanks for your proofreading, early beta reader duties on the book.
All right, well, your new book is called Epitaph. It is the sequel to Necropolis. Once the reviews pour in, I'm sure it'll be maligned. In the meantime, I've been Michael Brody. I've been joined by Shane Simmons. Our little show today was called Cinema Smackdown, and we'll be back next week to dish out a little bit more of the goofiness you heard today.
You're listening to CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal.
I stare at the seconds,
Yes.
trying to get just enough syllables in. Bonne chance. Is this your final
CJLO
show?
1690
My God.
AM is holding their annual
All right,
funding
then.
drive,
Well,
running until September
Fun, we'll miss
22nd.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
CJLO is a
You guys can get
nonprofit
this
community
window.
campus radio station
Oh,
that is
we're
run
not-
almost
we don't
entirely
need
by
to.
volunteers.
No?
It's just on occasion.
Our on-air
Yeah.
personalities are the backbone
Might
of the
have somebody
station,
on the run
and
like,
there are
"Oh,
over
I just
80
hate that this
DJs